afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to be interviewing the 40th President of the United States of America, Mr. Ronald Reagan. Yes, thank you. It is such a privilege to have him here with us today.
Very happy to be here.
We will be discussing his presidential career and the major events and policies that occurred during it. Everyone, please welcome President Ronald Reagan.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the early 1980s, you implemented what you called the Reagan Doctrine. What was it and what success did it have on U.S. foreign policy?
Ah, yes, the Reagan Doctrine. Well, it allowed the U.S. to provide aid to anti-communist guerrillas and other resistant movements. The purpose was also to diminish Soviet influences on other governments in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It also benefited in potentially opening these doors to capitalism in other Soviet-supported nations. This doctrine truly opened our doors to foreign policy, and though it only lasted a short while, it is still seen in the government today. The idea of helping other people in other countries to free themselves was seen in the following president, Bill Clinton, in his democratic enlargement, which had the same ideas built in them.
Only 69 days into your new administration, John Hinckley Jr. attempted your assassination. How did being the first serving president to survive being shot help your political career?
Yes, I relive that moment every day of my life, and I'm blessed to be here today. I believe that everything happens for a reason, and God has a plan for all of us. If it wasn't for the assassination attempt, I may not have won. My approval rating rose 73%, and I think the fact that I recovered so quickly and returned to the duty right away made me more appealing to the people.
Okay. You were a very religious man. Why were you so passionate about allowing school prayer nationwide in any school?
Well, my whole life I had been around the Christian faith, and I truly wanted to allow people not to feel persecuted if they wanted to pray. It kind of became known as the 90 days that shook the world of religion. I proposed a school prayer amendment because prayer had been practiced and revered in schools from the early colonial times, and it was always considered an important tradition. In 1962, the Supreme Court decided to prohibit prayer in public schools. The amendment specially states, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
You addressed the Soviet Union as an evil empire. What did they do in order for you to give them this title? And did you still feel this way when Gorbachev was leader?
At that time, before and during the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were considered enemies. I, along with the U.S. government, believed the Soviets were the aggressors in many of the world issues. Even before I was president, this was still the case. So I guess you could say that there was some tension there. I was extremely anti-communist, and I believed that the USSR was to spread communism worldwide. And this struck a nerve with me. I truly believed that they were an evil empire that needed to be destroyed. Gorbachev and I actually did have a good relationship, and once I saw his efforts to try and attempt to reform the Soviet Union, I gained a lot of respect for that man, and I no longer saw the Soviets as an evil empire.
Okay. The economy rose greatly during your first presidential term. What actions did you take in order to accomplish this?
The people nowadays call it Reaganomics, and I mostly tried to reduce all marginal taxes, regulations on business, and the money supply to reduce inflation. I am nowhere near perfect, and towards the last part of my term, there was a lot of nation's debt. But when I first became president, I did inherit a terrible economy. I promised the people that I would provide something different after the Nixon, Ford, and Carter administration, and I promised to restore success by getting the government off the backs of the American people. By cutting taxes, deregulating the economy, and slashing spending. I also believe my strong confidence in free market principles added confidence to the American people. Thankfully, after that, America's prosperity was great.
It was. Yes. We were just joking about what America would be like without Reaganomics. The disintegration of the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986 was a pivotal moment in your presidential term. What do you remember from this day? How did you handle this devastating event, and how did you think you could have stopped it?
This was a very sad event for me. I remember it being January 28th, and I was preparing for a pre-State of the Union and luncheon. Then my Vice President Bush and security advisors, John Poindexter, came in, and I could tell something was wrong. All I could say at that time was that they had received a flash that the space shuttle had exploded. I remember as I watched it, I was preparing myself for what was ahead, and it was a very, very traumatic experience. I could not get the families of any of the astronauts out of my head. I knew I had to address the nation, and I had Peggy Noonan help me write my speech, and I mostly wanted to get across that the space program would continue, and that the U.S. would not shrink away from sending men to space. I sat in my Oval Office that day and made it clear that we should mourn their loss as a nation together. and that there would be more shuttle flights, more crew, and more shuttle teachers to continue. I later learned that the O-rings of the shuttle had frozen over due to the freezing temperatures at the launch site. It could have been prevented by choosing a different launch site, or even just taking a moment to think, I should probably defrost the rings. And it would only take an hour. It's sad to think that something so simple caused this tragedy, but there does come a time where we have to learn from our mistakes and move on.
You advocated a more militant process than past President Nixon on the war on drugs. What steps did you take to stop this growing epidemic, and was it successful or not?
During the war on drugs, illegal cocaine was coming into the country at a very, very alarming rate, and 4 to 5 million people used it regularly. 500,000 Americans were hooked on heroin, and 1 in 12 smoked marijuana regularly. And drug use is even higher among 18 to 25-year-olds. Let alone drug abuse costs fellow Americans $60 billion a year. I was disgusted with these facts, and I knew I had to do something. Many groups and acts were created. I remember a little child asked my wife one day, Nancy, what should we do if we are offered drugs? And my wife replied, just say no. Those children and many others then started the Just Say No Club, and now there are 10,000 across the nation. The passage of the Drug and Abuse Act of 1988 allowed federal death penalties for drug kingpins, which were drug lords. Many people believe this was the most unsuccessful point in my presidency due to the fact that though casual drug use was lowered, there was an increase in drug trade violence, constant addiction rates, and HIV due to the spread of needles, and the unexpected rapid growth of crack cocaine in our country. Though I stand strong with the actions I took, it may be true that things could have been handled differently, and it was not the most successful part of my term.
This sounds like a tough time.
Yep.
There was tension between Libya and the U.S. during your term. What events occurred to make this tension greater?
Yes, well, in 1981 there was speculation that Libya was attempting to be a nuclear power, and Libyan leader Gaddafi had control of Chad, which was rich in uranium. It concerned, along with me, most of the U.S. American citizens. What made things even worse was Gaddafi had alignment with the Soviets, our then enemy. Many bombs occurred around the world at the hands of Libyan agents. That became the last straw, and we planned an airstrike against Libya. Afterwards, Gaddafi made it clear that he and I were not friends, and that reconciliation between Libya and U.S. was absolutely impossible. He did promise to never attack the U.S. or U.S. targets, but did I believe him? Not at all. But years after my presidency, in 2008, there was a settlement between the two nations, and now we are at peace.
That is good to hear. Okay, so the Iran-Contra affair became a huge political scandal during the 1980s. What was it, and did you have anything to do with it?
The Iran-Contra affair was an undercover arrangement to fund Nicaraguan Contra rebels with money received from selling weaponry to Iran. You could say the scandal was a result of 2 different initiatives. One being the commitment to aid the Contras, who were conducting guerrilla warfare against the Sandinistas, and the second being to calm moderates within the Iranian government, in order to make certain to release American hostages held captive there in Lebanon, and to influence Iranian foreign policy to head in a more Western direction. My administration did have a strong opposition to this, but the full Democratic Congress at the time enacted the Bullen Amendment, which prohibited any government agency from giving military aid to the Contras. My administration worked around these rules by involving the National Security Council, which wasn't really covered by the law. Under McFarlane and Poindexter, the NSC raised secret and foreign funds for the Contras. In 1986, the scandal broke when a Lebanese newspaper forced my administration to disclose the deal. Many people think I was aware of this undercover arrangement, but me and my VP, Bush Sr., were both completely uninformed about the affair, and there is no evidence proving otherwise that links us to the scandal.
People would say you are accredited with the ending of the Cold War. How did you accomplish this?
Well, it wasn't just my doing that ended the Cold War. The Soviet Union was already beginning to crumble under communism, and it was Gorbachev who rid the Soviets of communism. I never claimed to have bettered the USSR, let alone won the Cold War. I would say that the idea was based on political formulation. I do, on the other hand, accredit my massive buildup of weaponry that the Soviets knew they could not handle, and my strong dislike of détente, a decrease of tension during the Cold War. I believe that the Soviets saw détente as a sign of American weakness and vulnerability. I wanted peace through strength, and that's what I had in my policies. My Cold War policies were designed to spread freedom and democracy around the world. Through this, anti-communism began to spread through Eastern Europe, and I believe that contributed to the end of the Cold War. But it truly didn't even fall until 2 years after my term.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and answer my questions, Mr. President. Thank you very much, and I hope you'll be back soon.
No problem, anytime.
Ladies and gentlemen, President Ronald Reagan. Goodbye from the both of us. Well, that's a wrap, folks. Hope to see you next time.